And welcome, everybody. I'm pleased to join you from Treaty 5 Traditional Territory, the homeland of the Tataskweyak Cree Nation, here in Thompson. And I'm honored to be joining Chief Doreen Spence of the Tataskweyak Cree Nation. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence as well of Michael Rosenberg, litigation partner at McCarthy Tetro, and Alana Robert, litigation associate at McCarthy Tetro, who are representing Tataskweyak Cree Nation in this historic class action lawsuit. I am here as the Member of Parliament for Churchill Kiewit-Nukaskia to support the efforts of Tataskweyak Cree Nation. As Member of Parliament, I fully support these historic efforts that TCN is making. They are standing up for the need for clean water in their community. They are standing up for human rights in their community. And I want to stress how shameful it is that Canada, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, is not living up to its obligation to TCN and many First Nations. Canada's failure to provide clean drinking water to 58 First Nations is a national shame. The government will make their promises, but they've found numerous excuses to not deliver when it comes to their, quote, most important relationship, that with Indigenous peoples. They've made many promises. The Prime Minister promised his government would eliminate all drinking water advisories by 2021. But they have not delivered. As recently as December 2020, Minister Miller recognized that Canada must, quote, build a sustainable system that ensures that First Nations communities have access to safe drinking water now and for generations to come, unquote. And he's acknowledged his role in, quote, bearing the responsibility for this and the duty to get this done, unquote. We haven't seen anything yet. It's always the same thing with this government. They'll say the right things at the national level, but when it comes down to it, they don't deliver for communities. First Nations are fed up and they are taking action. In November 2019, Tataskweyak Cree Nation launched a class action lawsuit against the government over the government's failure to provide clean drinking water. They are still waiting. While the government continues to dither, Tataskweyak Cree Nation has been forced to escalate by sending a letter this week asking a UN rapporteur to intervene. As a Member of Parliament representing TCN, I support their call. We've also sent letters to special rapporteurs indicating this. I've notified the Prime Minister and Minister Miller and hope that they will finally act. If they won't be moved by their own failure, if they won't be moved by a class action lawsuit, hopefully being shamed on the international stage will force them to act. Let's be clear, this is a pattern of this government. They've been sued for a lack of funding for First Nations children in care over their failure to get clean drinking water. It begs the question, how many lawsuits will it take for the federal government to respect their human rights obligations to First Nations? The Liberal failure to deliver on this critical promise of clean drinking water is costing people their lives. The 2,300 people that live in TCN and Split Lake have gone nearly 4 years without access to clean drinking water. They rely on water being shipped in for drinking. The water in TCN is making people sick. Stomach illnesses are widespread in the community. Children are covered with intense skin rashes and sores from bathing in the treated tap water. Community members are increasingly falling sick from chronic illnesses. It's heart-wrenching. And no one can look at the images, and many of you will have received them by email, of what children and members of the community have had to endure. And yet, despite all of this, TCN goes above and beyond to fight for its people, including during this COVID crisis. When the government refused to recognize the problem of clean drinking water, TCN was forced to hire their own analysts who confirmed that the water supply contains cyanobacteria that produce harmful toxins. Unfortunately, Canada's water testing parameters don't even test for these harmful toxins that are found in TCN water. If Canada valued the human rights and dignity of the people of TCN, why would they let this stand? It's clear from Canada's actions that Canada expects TCN to put up with contaminated drinking water. This is shocking and unacceptable. No one in Canada should lack access to clean drinking water. No one in Canada should absolve the government of their failure. TCN has been a partner to Canada, but Canada is not a partner to TCN. It's time for that to change. Before I hand it off to Chief Spence to speak to the reality of her community, I did want to share some of those images here on screen so you have a sense of what little ones in the community have had to put up with untreated water. Shocking images in a country as wealthy as ours. This is what TCN is fighting for. This is what we're standing up for here today. Chief Doreen Spence, would you be able to take the floor?
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to acknowledge that the story regarding our water quality has to be shared. We've been waiting for many years already to have clean drinking water. My community has a population of 2,300 people on reserve, and we've been under a drinking water advisory for 4 years. And dealing with this pandemic too has only made the water crisis worse. We have bottled water brought in weekly, and that still isn't enough. We have people, the fire department, hauling water for us, and -50 below weather. Many people here do not trust the taps, the water, and a lot of people have not. I just wanted to mention too that our water source in Split Lake, is deteriorating, and it has been over the last couple of years. There's always that mistrust of the water here in the community. People go to Ashian, which is about 8 kilometers away, to get water from the lake because they trust that water. Many of our homes we get water delivery through a truck. And even that, I don't think is adequate. Not enough water is supplied to homes, and people run out daily, and they have to use that water to shower, do their laundry. And when I want to talk about the children that are affected by the water as well, not just children, but adults as well. I know for a fact that both of my daughters are affected by the water. They have rashes on their body, and that causes them to feel embarrassed about their skin. And another thing that I've been hearing too is that a lot of our members too have stomach ailments, and most of them are finding out. I think this is affecting many people in the community, young and old. Some people are finding out that this is leading to stomach to H. pylori. I'm really glad that the story is being shared at this time, because it's time that First Nations speak up, because to me this is like systematic racism on our part. The federal government is ignoring us and our issues. We also had a feasibility done for a new water source. It was completed, and right now it's just basically sitting there. If we had this new water source, it will help the community greatly. It's a hookup, for in Ashian Lake, which is about 8 kilometers away from our community. All this information has been gathered and shared, and Canada is aware of this is where we want to get our clean drinking water now. TCN has, like, we've informed Canada and ISC for so many years already about our drinking water. We've spent thousands of dollars hiring experts to help us, and we believe that this is very important, and we just have to. This is basically for our youth, for our children. The water quality is not getting any better here in the community, and our why we're pursuing this is that these children in the next couple of years or in the future have adequate drinking water. And Canada's inaction has left TCN no choice to bring this to the United Nations. Our children, our members are still getting sick from the water. And I feel that, it's Canada's responsibility and duty to provide to all First Nations. And clean drinking water is one of them. So right now, we're asking Canada to act now. I know previously, a couple of months ago, that Minister Miller announced that there was going to be a delay in First Nations receiving clean drinking water. But I think that, we are a priority. This issue is a priority, and everybody should be entitled to clean drinking water in Canada. And in order for us to move forward, like, I call upon the youth as well to be involved in this. I think that all youth should write letters to members of, the Cabinet of Government of Canada, asking them to address the water advisories in First Nations and to provide clean, safe drinking water to all reserves. And I also wanted to share this message too to all other First Nations currently under a boil watery advisory. I urge you guys to join this class action against Canada. I know that many First Nations fear repercussions from Canada if they join the class action, since Canada continues to exercise control over First Nations. Canada should provide First Nations with reassurance that they will not be prejudiced by Canada for standing up for their human rights and joining this class action. First Nations need the water issues on reserves to be addressed. We can no longer sit back and, ignore this issue, because we all know that water is life, right? So I just wanted to get that message out there, that this issue that we've been dealing with in our community, we can no longer ignore it anymore. We have to fight for our people. We matter like all other Canadians, right?
The class, as it's been defined by the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench, includes First Nations and their members that were subject to a long-term drinking water advisory, being a drinking water advisory that lasted for more than 1 year, from 1995 to the present. So that's the group of class members that are eligible to participate. There's a distinction there that's important, though, insofar as the members of First Nations are automatically included in this class proceeding unless they take the step of opting out. The First Nations, though, as First Nations, have to take the step of opting in. They have to engage and take a positive step to participate. And so, as Chief Spence says, she's calling on other First Nations who have been similarly affected by this water crisis to take that step of opting in and participating in this class action and making their voices heard. In terms of the response that we've received from the Government of Canada, it's a matter of public record that we have engaged in discussions with the government with a view to resolving this matter. Certainly, it is not the preference of Chief Spence, Tataskweyak Cree Nation, or other class members to litigate. Urgent action is needed, and we all understand that these cases take years to wend their way through the courts if litigation becomes necessary. So because of the dire situation, because of how desperately class members need relief, we would welcome a resolution from discussions with the Government of Canada. Unfortunately, we are here today litigating because we have not been able to achieve that resolution. And if we are ultimately unable to achieve that resolution, then the case will move forward in the courts.
Thank you.
And I should just say on the last point that you raised, you asked Chief Spence about whether she's surprised or whether she thought the government's efforts have been sincere to lift long-term drinking water advisories. The thing I would just remind everyone is that TCN first commissioned a feasibility study to draw water from Assyrian Lake in 2006. Its latest was in 2019. And to date, there has been no funding advance to move that project to the planning stage so that the water intake might actually be built and the drinking water advisory in this community actually lifted. And that's part of the frustration that Chief Spence has expressed, that there does not seem to be a match between the government's sincere profession of regret for the situation and vow to do better on the one hand, and on the other hand, on the ground action to build infrastructure and close the gap that results in these long-term drinking water advisories. There is another class proceeding in the federal court. The representative plaintiffs in that matter are Chief Emily Waitung of Curve Lake First Nation, Chief Christopher Muniz of Niskantaga First Nation, and their respective First Nations. That's also been certified as a class proceeding. And Chief Spence and Tataskweyak Cree Nation are working hand in hand with those representative plaintiffs to advance a united front to ensure that this water crisis is tackled as effectively as possible, as quickly as possible, and to achieve results for a national class. So we are counsel for the representative plaintiffs and the class in the federal court action as well. And the aim is to bring both class actions to a hearing on the merits together and asking that the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench sit with the federal court in order to hear both cases at once and ensure that a single hearing produces the greatest chances of a joint or mutually reconcilable decision from the courts so that we can have real clarity on rights. And the first level common issue that's being asked of the courts is to recognize the federal government's obligation to ensure that First Nations have reasonable access to clean water. That's what's being put to the courts. And we expect that if no resolution is reached, that that issue will be put to the courts this summer or perhaps in the early fall, and the plaintiffs will move for summary judgment, seeking a declaration that they are entitled to that relief. They will seek a declaration recognizing their rights. The point about rights is a very important one, and we heard consistently across the country stories from First Nations where they had sort of come to the end of the road and had been unable to compel any kind of long-term solution to their drinking water problems. And the federal government was not offering any such solution, and they'd run out of options. And it was the story we heard in Tataskweyak Cree Nation. It was a story we heard in Curve Lake First Nation, story we heard in Neskantaga First Nation, and so many others. And so this lawsuit came out of that frustration. And the aim is to recognize, as I said earlier, to recognize rights, a right to reasonable access, adequate access to clean drinking water on reserves, so that we aren't in this debate in the future about how much funding is needed, how much will get them there, how much can Canada advance. There simply will be a recognition of a right and an obligation on the part of the federal government. That is the kind of certainty that class members want. They want a recognition of their rights, a basic human right, I think we would all agree, to clean drinking water. And if we can achieve the recognition of that right through this class action, then I'm hopeful that we won't have to have this debate in future generations, and the future generations in these reserve communities will have the water security that they deserve. We have had significant interest in participating in the class proceeding, and that's both on behalf of members of First Nations and the First Nations themselves. And we are certainly hopeful that all class member First Nations will decide to participate in order to assert their rights and to obtain what we hope will be a recognition of their rights. I'm happy to speak to the technical aspects for Tataskweyak Cree Nation. There are two studies that were commissioned at Tataskweyak Cree Nation's expense, one in 2018, one in 2019, commissioned by Dr. Ian Halkett, H-A-L-K-E-T, a hydrologist. And they both conclude that Split Lake, the water in Split Lake, is not fit for human consumption. There are a variety of issues, from E. coli contamination to total coliform counts. But as Chief Spence mentioned, there's also this aspect of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria that is particularly troubling, in that 3 of the species of cyanobacteria that have been identified in Split Lake produce toxins that are known to be harmful to humans. The water treatment plant is not designed to remove all of those toxins. And as Ms. Ashton mentioned, the current testing regime does not test for all of them. And so part of the effort has been to work with the federal government to put in place a testing regime that will address the concerns that are raised by the studies that Tataskweyak Cree Nation commissioned. And there was a commitment in 2020, in the spring of 2020, to fund that testing. Unfortunately, the funding did not materialize, and it remains a matter of discussion. The testing has not commenced, the expanded testing to address the cyanobacteria. And so Tataskweyak Cree Nation has unfortunately been left with more questions than answers about the problems with its water and what will be necessary to chart a way forward to safe drinking water on its reserves. So, that's the technical perspective. I am not an expert. I'm not a hydrologist myself. I'm just a lawyer, but the reports make clear that the water in Split Lake is contaminated, and that is why the community feels very strongly that its long-term drinking water solution involves drawing water from Assun Lake, which is not exposed in the same way to the riverine system that flows into Split Lake, which is at the convergence of the Nelson and Burntwood rivers.
As we know, there are 58 First Nations that are still very much waiting for boiled water advisories to be cleared. A number of our communities are struggling with this in our region. Garden Hill, for example, isn't even on the list because upgrades were made to its water treatment plant. But as has been pointed out, in fact, CBC expose pointed out that by the time the water gets to the homes, it's not fit for drinking, right? So we are talking about a systemic issue, and a systemic issue rooted in systemic racism that needs to be addressed by the federal government. What's unique in this situation is that TCN is making history by being part of a class action lawsuit, by also reaching out to the UN Special Rapporteurs, calling for an international investigation into what Canada is doing here. I really want to acknowledge Chief Spence's courage in this matter. And she's pointed out something that's a very, very real concern and very concerning. The fear that First Nations might have that there will be repercussions if they stand up and say, Canada, we're taking you to court because you are not fulfilling your obligations to us. That fear is something that it shouldn't be there, and it is, because the situation is that connection with the federal government is such a strong one, and we know the history of repercussions and discrimination that First Nations have experienced at the hands of the federal government. And so I really want to express my support for TCN and the work that they're doing on the front lines of this struggle. They've made clear they do not want to go to court on this. The hope here is not litigation. The hope here is for immediate action. And I think we've heard that from Chief Spence clearly, from the lawyers clearly. These kids with these rashes, this can be dealt with right now. The reports are there. The solutions are there. What is missing here is political will. And the COVID crisis has laid bare the extent to which underfunding and neglect when it comes to critical infrastructure, including drinking water, has made people more sick. It is incumbent on the federal government in this crisis and beyond to step up and invest in a new water treatment plant and water infrastructure for TCN and deal with these boiled water advisories once and for all. I mean, the fact that First Nations have to go to court, the fact that First Nations have to reach out to UN Special Rapporteur, when Canada prides itself on lecturing the world on human rights, well, let's look at the situation here at home. This situation is unacceptable. Prime Minister Trudeau has in the past scored political points by saying he cares about clean drinking water on First Nations. And in the middle of a COVID crisis, when I think the government thought maybe people weren't paying attention, they came out with a sob story about how they're not actually going to deal with it with any sense of urgency. That cannot stand. And really, the message I'm here to support today is there are solutions to be found. They're clear. TCN has made them clear. The lawyers have made this clear. This is a moment in history where First Nations are taking a very important stand. First Nations like TCN. This is Canada's chance to act. Let's put an end to this national shame, and let's see them make the investments necessary in TCN and other communities that deserve, like all Canadians, clean drinking water.